So it's not, the separate set and then what I put together. I started with his and just built off of that, keeping the meanings of his pieces the same as they were.
Right.
I just can't look at the cosmogram mentally and be out of my own head while I'm trying to do a reading yet.
It's pretty cool because once you get used to what it means, it's really cool. But it's getting used to the sight of it because it will overpower your brain. I mean, it will overthrow your brain unless you kind of relax your mind and study up on what the meaning of it is. It gets pretty simple when you deal with it. I know a lot of readers, and I researched it pretty far as I could, and a lot of readers will sit down on the ground and draw a circle and put a cross in the middle.
Yes.
So that equilateral cross thing is really something that's really kind of, it's historic. It's very historic. The thing I don't like about it is I like to use everything. If it falls off the mat, it doesn't count. But even then, still, I sometimes will keep it where it's at. Now, sometimes what falls off the mat is a reading in itself.
Sometimes what falls off the mat is what's missing.
Exactly, or it's not speaking at the time, but you can also look at it and go, oh, well, that's a reading in itself, but with the cosmogram, it's so big that there's the layers of this stuff has a lot of influence or is not very changeable. This stuff is more solid and going to stay the same. And then there's the elements of with the equilateral cross. It's like, okay, this hasn't happened yet, is going to come into play. This is daytime. This is or active. This is now. This is just beginning. This over here is in full swing, and this is on the way. This is still swinging, but it's on the way out.
Right.
So that's how I work with that. And I think that stuff tends to be really important. And it's when those readings spread way out that comes in handy. When they come into a clump, I'm like, oh dear, and I have to pick them apart. But it's still I don't have a problem usually, but I just every now and again I'll just look, I'll go wow, and I'll have to sort of pick it apart because it's so That's another thing. Learning to throw that basket. Learning to throw. I'll tell anybody that's listening right now. Learning to throw those bones out of a basket is a skill because you can't just dump them unless you only got a handful in there. You got to kind of shake them around. You got to spread them out. And a lot of people will get bogged down with, I can't throw them out. I can't toss them right. I can't put them on the mat right. And you were talking about you don't do what they call sortilege throws. So you never reach into your bag or your pile and just grab a handful and throw them down?
No. Nope.
Sometimes what I'll do when I do the reading, I do the reading with the 180 pieces or God forbid, one time I did a reading was 210 pieces. I had the lady wanted to put in every one of her brothers and sisters and all their spouses. And then I accidentally mixed all the pieces I wasn't using together. I used every piece I had in this reading. And I did it all in 45 minutes. I don't know how I did it. But when I get done sometimes with a reading, I'll scoop it all into a pile and I'll ask them, is there anything left that's really pressing you that you want to know? And I will dig my hand in there. I will scoop and I'll just keep folding it. I'll toss it almost like a salad, if you will, with my hands. And then I'll reach in and grab a handful and I'll hold it aside and I'll just drop them. And then whatever's on the mat, then I can usually address what they're saying with what's there. And to talk about a nonlinear way of dealing with things, let me tell you what, sometimes those questions they're asking, those pieces on that mat really make you dig in your mind to figure out what they're telling, what you need to tell them about what they asked you.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten to that point yet. And I think for me, when I'm doing, I throw them all because even if the client has a question, I'm always proposing to my spirits, my ancestors, my guides, what does this person need to know?
Right.
Not just what they're asking, because there's other stuff underlying, their question 9 times out of 10 is not really why they came to see you.
Exactly. And that's why you notice I said I do that at the end. So I do the general reading with all the pieces. And then at the very end, I'll ask them, are there any questions you want to ask me? And they'll ask me and I'll pick it and I'll look at the spread and I'll get their answer that I can get out of the spread. And then I'll say, how you feel about that? And they'll be like, okay or not okay. And then sometimes they'll have, it just depends. Sometimes Spirit says, hey, Frank, do one more grab. And I'll stuff them all together and I'll swirl them all around and I'll stick my hand down in there and I'll grab them and just throw them down. And that's when the magic happens, kind of, really. But it makes me work. It makes me work. It does.
I took another cue from Michelle Jackson, and I have key pieces in my set. For love, for work, for money, for job, for relationships. For almost every issue I can think of. And this is one of the reasons why I like to just throw them all. Because even after I'm finished reading, if they still have a question, I'll look for the key piece.
Right.
And I'll read specifically on that question for that particular piece, which I may not have touched on, or I may read in conjunction with what their initial question was. But now it takes on a completely different meaning, having to do with the question that they ask.
Exactly. There's times when the situation will sort of almost dictate itself. That's where a lot of times when that one piece starts jumping around, back to that badger claw again, and one piece starts jumping around, I got to pay attention because it's trying to tell them people something.
And I also have a bicycle charm in my set.
That's interesting.
And the reason why I put the bicycle charm in there is, there's a lot of times that people are looking to get ahead in life, or they're looking to get a better job or a raise. And the bicycle for me is all about putting in the footwork. You got a lot of pedaling to do. You really need to move your butt. You need to, get on that path and keep things moving, because if you stop, what happens on the bicycle? You slow down, and you stop moving, and you fall off.
Right.
So the bicycle, depending on the direction it lands, if it's moving towards the issue or away from the issue, also gives me the indication on what they need to work on and put their footwork in.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I use a frog for things like that, for transitions and things like that, for making, leaps of faith, or, if they can see where they're headed, things like that,
Yeah, I use a frog too for the leaps of faith and for transition, but it didn't have the footwork, how much leg work you have to put in, how much extra energy, you have to expel, either to get away from or move towards whatever the situation is.
That's a great idea. I may incorporate that idea.
Well,
that's a great idea.
I think I was talking to you about another piece that I'm going to be adding, which is a little pair of ice skates. As soon as I find them.
Issue.
Skating around the issue. You're skating on thin ice. You need to make sure that you are handling things delicately with whatever the situation or the person is, and to tread lightly or to skate around gently, so you don't fall in on that thin ice.
Yeah, see, I use, for a piece like that, I use a stone called apatite, which is, it's APAPTITE. I think it's apatite, but it's about being very gentle with yourself and the situation, and it depends on what it comes around, how that works.
Right, and it never ceases to amaze me the types of pieces you can put into a bone set and the meanings that they have. I mean, you can use anything. Somebody has in Michelle Jackson's bone group on Facebook, they have a little red plastic Dalek from Doctor Who.
Right.
And I was just like, man, I'm a Who fan. How come I didn't think of that?
Yeah, stuff comes, I'll tell you a good story about that. Like, and once you learn, it's almost like once you learn to read really, and this is what I would tell anybody else that's also starting out. Once you get it, and once you kind of get being able to sort of see the meaning the dualistic and triplistic and quadraphonic and every other kind of meaning in the pieces. I went into a lady's house, and she had a cup on her shelf that was like a junk cup. It was all this stuff that she had just thrown in this cup, all these pieces of stuff. I tell you what, I threw that cup down on the counter, and I read that cup. And she was like, "What?" And I was like, "What's so simple? Look, da 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 da." And it made total sense to her. I mean, to me, it was almost like a fun thing to do, but it worked. It worked.
And what people need to understand is, when you are connected and you get it, and I'm not just talking bone readings, I'm talking any kind of spiritual reading. When you get it and you have the connection with spirit, you literally can read pretty much anything.
That's true. Very true.
You can give meanings to certain things. Certain things have meanings already. Spirit will dictate and tell you what certain meanings are or how they play together, what they have to do with. There's the online, I'll call it, I don't want to call it banter because it's not really banter, but different views of opinion on whether you should use spirit and ask questions or whether it is just intuition. And my thought has always been, intuition is great and wonderful, but you still have to present questions. You still have to, in some way, shape, or form, ask what it is that you want to know or that your client knows.
Exactly. And you also have to ask for the spirit to reveal stuff the client needs to know.
Exactly.
And also, too, and on a more almost, dare I say, selfish note, the spirit needs to reveal to the reader what all can be, what's the word I'm looking for, pulled away from, or what meanings can be pulled away from that spread, that piece, that pattern, or whatever it is. I mean, so there's the spiritual connection cannot be denied. It strengthens everything. There's no way you can go about this without an ancestral connection that's strong, and you got to feed those ancestors. And you can't do it. I don't think you can do it without a spiritual connection with a faith. I ask everybody that I read. It always comes up. I say, "What's your faith?" And a lot of them don't have one. A lot of the clients don't have a spiritual practice. And in some cases, those readings are screaming, "You need to get a spiritual. You need a spiritual a life. You need a spiritual angle on your life because your life is lacking some of the depth you could have." And I'll say, "Do you see this reading? Do you see what's on the table?" And it's like, "Yeah." And I'll say, "Well, do you think it's deep?" And they'll say, "Yeah, it's really. How do you get all this stuff from it?" And I say, "Well, because it's a spiritual practice." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So then they come away from it understanding that a spiritual connection of some kind, is important. And one of the ways that I kind of tell people that is I have a small, I have a skeleton key. I use a skeleton key, of course, but I also have a small key that would be like for a little metal key for like a wind-up toy, like that. For like when I was a kid, I'm 50 years old. So like when I was like 10 years old or whatever. Little wind-up key for like a little, car or something, right?
Right.
And that key is broken on one side. It's been broken. So if that key comes up with the broken side, I know those people right there, their spirituality is either broken or they're not practicing. Now, it's more that it's broken. I have another piece I use that is a dark blue stone that has a white streak through it on one side, and on the other side it's almost black. And if I see that stone black and I see that key broken, that tells me right there that person needs more spirituality in their life, and they need to get they need to step into the spiritual path, so to speak, and start working.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that in order to be, I'm going to say, completely healthy on all levels, it's the mind, the body, the spirit, the emotions. I mean, all of these things have to be present, be balanced.
Yeah, not only present, but fed and worked with and nurtured and taken care of.
And I agree. So I know we're running a little over time, which I don't mind at all. But I do want to thank some of the wonderful people that we have in our chat group. We have Stephanie Francis, Tanya. We have Divinity Diva, John, Thomas Elliott, Professor Charles